Hey, welcome to the second lesson of the course in which we are going to talk about our camera's light measuring modes. It's a little button inside the menu which helps us to understand better certain lighting situations, especially when we face high contrast situations. Before talking about measuring modes, I need to clarify some concepts about light direction and contrast, or quality of the light. There are some basic features of the lighting of our scene, like the intensity, which is the amount of light with which we are working with. We control that amount of light with the lens aperture, shutter speed and ISO. And on the other hand, we have the direction of the light, that is, where the light we are going to be working with is coming from. The position of the beam of light is really important in order to position ourselves and getting the results we are looking for, okay? And on the other hand, we have to pay attention to the quality of light. When in photography we talk about quality of an image, it's something very different from when we are talking about quality of light. Quality of light refers to the contrast on the scene, that is, the difference in a photography between the lights and the shadows. If there are few shadows and the lighting is more or less homogeneous, we are talking about a smooth lighting. Or if we have a completely lateral or very direct light that generates a part with lights and another part with shadows, that's when we are talking about a hard or high contrast light, which makes a part well lit and another remaining in shadows. And we'll lose detail, okay? I've brought here a light point, which I'll turn on, and my model here, which will help us, so that you can see the effect of the direction of light. First, we are going to talk about the direction, because we can create different effects depending on how we position the light. If we have the light above the subject with a 90 degrees down angle, the shadows are projected downwards and we can appreciate very well the volume of the object. If we set the light the opposite direction, this might be the least natural direction because usually light doesn't come from below. We are talking 90 degrees up angle light, and if we set front light, there's usually very few shadows, but the object flattens. And if we set a side light, for example, what we do is create volume in the dark. Okay, I can use both this side and these other sides, okay? And then we also have the backlight, a very expressive light, much more dramatic, because what it does is leave the subject's shape in shadow, and sometimes it can create a light halo surrounding the object. So that's regarding light's direction. What happens with quality of light? Take a look. It's not the same for me to set the light very close to the dark. See, there's a very light zone and a zone with a lot of shadows. And the dark shadow is very hard on the table. In photography, you will also find accessories like, for example, this diffuser, which is a kind of white fabric which smooths out the source of light. So, if I place the diffuser between the lamp and the dog, notice that we practically lose that contrast. It gathers the light, it widens it, and it makes it more diffused. So, knowing about light contrast is basic for you to understand properly when to use each light metering mode. What your cameras usually do when you are about to take a picture is to evaluate the whole scene and measure the light of everything you are seeing. Remember that our camera works measuring reflected light. This scene reflects a certain amount of light, this other scene reflects another amount of light, depending on the color of the objects and the light and the contrast your scene has. There's several metering modes in your camera. If you turn it on and look for it in the menu, you can access it through the menu button in the shot mode options, or you can find a shortcut in this Canon model. I can access through the quick control screen to the metering modes, which are here, okay? In this case, this camera has 4 metering modes. Most of the cameras have 3 or 4 or maybe one more, but those extra ones are variations of variations, so check how many metering modes your camera has in the instruction manual and read thoroughly what each of them means, which I'll explain in a bit, but each manufacturer will explain it in a slightly different way. So I'll get into the metering modes, and in this camera we have evaluative metering, which is the first one. In other camera models, it might be called matrix metering or multi-segment also, okay? So evaluative matrix multi-segments, all of those are referring to a general metering. That is, I consider all the light of everything I see in frame, and I do that equally. If there's shadows here, midtones here, and highlights here, the camera registers all that information and takes an average value. Okay, that's probably the default metering mode on your camera, and that's the one I recommend you to leave on, because usually it works well. When will that metering mode not work well? Well, mostly when you have a high contrast light like this one. I have one very light spot and the rest in shadow. Imagine that it was off and we only had this point of light and the rest was completely dark, or for example about a concert, or any other scene with backlight. When there's a high contrast in lighting and almost everything is in shadow and there's very low light, the importance of doing a proper light metering is essential. Which metering mode should we use when we have a high contrast scene? Well, there are cameras if you get into the metering modes menu again. As we said before, evaluative is the main one, okay? But we find others like the center weighted average, partial, and spot. There are cameras that don't have the spot metering option and have only the partial metering one, and vice versa. That's why I recommend you to take a look to your camera and see the name the manufacturer uses and the differences between each mode. Center weighted average, that's the first we are going to do. Before we were talking about matrix metering modes, and now we're going to talk about center weighted average from our frame. It will give more weight to the central zone, 75% to the central zone and 25% to the rest. It will work great for general scenes, but when we want to put special emphasis in a detail, like a portrait, outdoors, or a detail of something in particular, we know it will focus on the weight to the central zone, that is, the light of the central zone of the scene. And if we have a lot of contrast, when we have a spotlight directly on an object, or, as I was saying before, a concert, spotlight and the rest completely in dark, completely in shadow, that's when it's interesting to rely on very precise metering modes, like a spot or partial metering. And as I was saying, depending on the camera, you can find even variants of the spot metering modes. What's up with those modes? They are the most critical and demanding, but they are the most precise, so if you learn to work with them, you'll make a correct light measurement and take the photo exactly as you like from the beginning. If this is my framing, the spot metering mode only considers the central point to register the light measurement of the scene. If it's partial metering mode, the difference is that the light measurement zone is a bit wider, that is, spot is a bit reduced and partial a bit wider. So you need to be very clear about that the center point is the one from which the camera takes the light measurement. And this gets a bit trickier because if we link this with the AF points, I remind you that your cameras all have selection of AF points in which you can leave all the AF points on, or you can set only one AF point, set it to the center. It's very important here that we differentiate those two concepts. One thing are AF points. Autofocus measures the distance at which the objects are. I can have this dog closer, further, and I can adjust the AF point so that the camera gives me that distance sharply. But light measurement is something completely different. I can make a light measurement of the dog with the central point, but I can have the AF point elsewhere, okay? It's important to understand this correctly and separate the light measurement point from the AF point. Up until now, we've usually used the evaluative or matrix metering, the main one, of course you have taken an average of light values and then you have worked with the AF points where you want it. Now, since we can work with the measurement in the central points and change the AF points, it can be a bit confusing thinking the AF point and the light measurement point are the same, okay? Anyway, I encourage you to take a good look at the features of your camera and read the instruction manual if the spot or partial metering modes are linked to the AF points. Okay? That's very important because sometimes when you change the AF point, you also change the light measurement point. In this camera, for example, it doesn't. We can separate the light measurement from the center and the AF point can be elsewhere, okay? So it's important to understand that one thing is to measure light and another one is the distance at which the objects are from the camera, okay? Let's do an exercise for you to understand a bit better metering modes. But above all, the most important thing from now is for you to start paying attention at how the light in the scene is, its direction, or what kind of contrast it offers. Because metering modes make sense only if you understand properly the application related to the amount of contrast your image has. Okay, so we're going to try and see the different results. We went outdoors in order to do an exercise with the different metering modes, just to understand how they work with the different situation you'll encounter. In case you find a high contrast scene, that's when it's interesting to know how to apply metering modes properly. See that this tunnel has a very defined shadow zone, a vast dark zone, and at the end of it, it has a highlight zone. It's not the same to work in a general measurement that considers all the lights, because it will give more weight to the shadows than a very precise measurement that only considers the light and only exposes properly the lit part, and the tunnel stays completely in shadow. We'll be able to make some curious backlight exercise playing with the silhouettes of people that get in and out of the tunnel. This exercise will also be useful for taking pictures of the sky, landscape, a concert where the background is in shadow and the musicians is always with the spotlight, okay? So we are going to simply see how our camera, depending on the different metering modes, evaluates more or less light quantity from the scene we have in front of us. Let's try it, and I encourage you to try it at home with, for example, a picture of a window against the light, or a landscape, or wherever you like. Let's see. We're going to use the 4 metering modes this camera offers. The first one, evaluative, matrix, multi-segment, which considers everything, and since there are so many shadow zones, it gives boosts shadows and it overexposes lights. If I take this picture with exposure level at 0, it indeed overexposes slightly the image. If I switch the metering mode to a different one, like the center-weighted average, which also considers all the frame, but in this case it confers more weight to the central zone, where there's more lights, it demands for us to raise a bit more the shutter speed. Right? So we lose quantity of light. This is more similar to what we want to achieve, that contrast in which the tunnel is dark and the background light looks right. If now instead of the center-weighted average metering we use partial metering, check out what happens. I turned on light view so you understand what it does better. A circle appears in the center, which didn't appear before. That circle indicates the reference zone of where the camera is going to measure light. If I change the exposure level, the light measurement reference zone varies. Now we reset the exposure level, which demands a slightly faster shutter speed than the previous one. I take the picture and we still get a better exposure than with the matrix or evaluative metering, with which the image is overexposes. And if I use the spot metering mode, look what the camera does. The reference circle, I don't know if you can see it properly, but the circle is a bit smaller than the previous one. In some cameras, since you won't have the spot metering mode, but you have the partial one, or the other way around, you just adapt the size of the light measurement reference zone. Look at this, it indicates one more light spot because the zone is smaller now. I correct it, making the exposure level to go back to 0, and I take the picture again. What's the difference of using one metering mode to the other? Well, if you notice, with the evaluative one, there's too much light because it considers everything, gives more weight to the shadows. So, as we change the light measurement reference mode, we get a better measurement of the light zone and the tunnel stays completely in the dark. So guys, see you in the next lesson!